Reflections on the Setting Sun, Strategic Impasse in the Phoenix Valley. Part 1. This is only the beginning. Abortion access long been a major flashpoint of American politics, providing a certain rhetorical terrain to legitimacy, debate, and a call into question of the validity of certain expressions of bodily autonomy, thinly veiling the true intentions at hand behind the notions of morality, ethics, and the ostensible scarcity of life. From 1973 until it was overturned in the early summer days of 2022, Roe v. Wade federally protected abortion access on some level, though efficacy of such protections have long been demonstrated as feeble at best. The Christian right has whittled away at abortion access in numerous states over the years, making abortion access functionally non-existent through a number of states prior to Roe's reversal. Since its inception, the Supreme Court's ruling has offered fertile ground for the political machinations of Democrats and Republicans alike. Regarding the former, this took the form of reliable cash cow, particularly during election season, calling every year for donations and votes in order to protect Roe and to protect women's rights. Even in the immediate aftermath of Roe's reversal, the Democratic charlatans couldn't resist the urge to immediately exploit this moment of crisis. Soon after the decision was announced, the calls for donations and votes followed, both assuring that the party would profit politically and monetarily, as well as providing an early start into assimilating would-be dissidents of this decaying leviathan back into its artificial animation of its corpse. What's more is that this manner of past and present calls for support hide the reality that across half a century that Roe v. Wade was on the books, the Democratic Party failed at every possible moment to codify this decision into law. This most recently occurred during the period of unified control of all three governing branches during the Obama era. For the right, and particularly for the religious right, Roe v. Wade and the abortion access is sought to provided the terrain by which a wide range of issues of bodily autonomy could be called into question under a legitimizing veneer. The coding of anti-abortion rhetoric in moralistic terms about the sanctity of life and protecting the rights of the unborn has nothing to do with either of those ideas. Regardless of the meaningless both phrases to begin with, the rhetoric of the anti-abortion sentiment pushed by the right isn't meant to provide a genuine, robust argument. They are instead meant to put forward a vague and agreeable assertion that is difficult to argue against without seeming morally suspect. The consequence, then, is that the opposition is put into a defensive posture, wasting time arguing against completely vacant assertions instead of engaging in what is truly being said. Consider, for example, how overwhelmingly stale it has become to rebuttal the framing of being pro-life by remarking on the right's support for imperialist wars, privatized healthcare, and so on. It has become a verbal tick amongst liberals and certain leftists that, while perhaps true on some level, leaves the real assertion unaddressed. What the right is seeking in earnest isn't so much the elimination of abortion access per se, although it would be painfully obvious that this is part of it, but rather the total denial of bodily autonomy, the expressions of self-sovereignty that it demands. What is sought is the imposition of a certain totalitarizing system of relations to ourselves, each other, and our environments, articulated by the most narrowly reactionary elements of white civil society. It should come as no surprise that those in alignment with this most recent reactionary turn have now taken to expressing that their work isn't over yet, and that this is only the beginning. In the Supreme Court's concurring opinion written by Clarence Thomas, court decisions protecting contraception, access, and same-sex marriage, as well as a case striking down the validity of anti-sodomy laws, were called into question. The same logic that pushed legal abortion access into uncertainty now seeks to do the same to a growing list of other expressions of self-creation that fall outside of a certain totalizing worldview. None of this should suggest that the state exists for whatever us that could be articulated, that it would do so if the right people were in power, or that the present state of affairs is the result of the state apparatus being hijacked by corruption and greed. What has been hitherto articulated is the normal functioning of this stinking leviathan. For it, like every state and civilization before it, is necessary premised on the denial of self-creation and bodily autonomy for its very existence. Since the days of kings of summer, this way of life that has long become a unified totality across the globe has been dependent on the expropriation of life. It should be understood that what is being debated in the halls of power is not whether or not abortion or any of the other hot-button issues should be protected or denied. Rather, what is being debated is the precise shape of the expropriation of life that will take in some specific territory with the monstrous system that devours our bodies. In the end, there's no place within this mode of relation that would allow for self-determination in any meaningful capacity. The reality of this collective expropriation of our lives and its subsequent immerseration is felt on a generalized scale by the captives of mass society. This recognition of a shared immiseration demonstrates itself in moments of unrest triggered by yet another humiliation suddenly dropped upon the excluded magnitude of this world. In the lead-up and subsequent aftermath of the most recent humiliating gesture, the insult has galvanized abominable hearts that align themselves with the ever-present entropy that threatens the order of domination. The more decisive and confrontational ones have opted for campaigns of nocturnal infernos aimed at the numerous patriarchal institutions determined to deny us of our bodies. As these actions have replicated and spread rapidly across the settler state, Jane's revenge has become a credible threat against the existent in a matter of weeks. Other clandestine actions to assert the sovereignty of our bodies have taken the form of gray market importation and DIY manufacture of common abortifacients like misoprostol and the proliferation of ancestral abortion techniques. Yet, most people trapped alongside us within the spectacle of this mass society have yet to fully realize their capacity and potential for self-creation and subsequently maintain a passive specter relationship to the unfolding disaster of this way of life. In turn, despite visceral feelings of anger and existential dread, in the face of the dominant reality violently forced upon the world, the avenues of action are unclear and the horizons towards something different are obscured by the impenetrable fog. Often, anxieties about and against the existent manifest in mass demonstrations, symptomatic of the desperate collective expression of a desire for something else in an attempt to alleviate an extant nagging tension with no obvious resolution. More often than not, these confused attempts to influence the conditions of existence do little more than physically exhaust its participants with little else to show for the effort. However, within a demonstration, regardless of how otherwise impotent, a disruption of the normal flows of capitalism occurs alongside the concentration of kinetic energy. In the newly opened terrain building this assemblage of frustrated people, the possibility for this kinetic force to escape the confines of dominant reality, ushering in the opening of all possibilities within the space of the rupture. This rupture, in all of its beauty and terror, presents within itself the potential to develop into a generalized revolt of an insurrection and the destruction of all existing social relations. Unfortunately, the types of ruptures necessary for the generalization of revolt and to threaten the continued existence of the techno-industrial nightmare that holds us hostage are far from the normal and even occasionally result of reactive mass demonstrations. Instead, the far more familiar result is that the various forms of mass demonstration create fertile ground for the machinery of recuperation and assimilation. Endless sidewalk marches, die-ins, and a litany of other sometimes creative but otherwise universally ineffectual and meaningless tactics grind down the less resilient participants, pushing them to retreat back to the mundanity of daily life. Disappointed and exhausted, the ones who take well to the mind-numbing regimentation of activity demanded by the movement managers are assimilated into the operation of this counterinsurgency operation. They are ushered into the legitimate avenues for change and offered a social and sometimes even monetary compensation for their good work. These are the activists, the specialists of both the assimilation of rebellious attitudes and the fine-tuning of dominant system repressive efficiency. These individuals, almost always hyper-socialized and overly well-adjusted to the dominant order, are the foot soldiers of recuperation that assure the flattening of any rebellious attitudes that may grow to offer a way out of this mode of existence. Finally, in the ideal functioning of dynamic, those who remain determined enough to survive the grinding regimentation of activity yet also remain resolute enough to refuse the assimilationist temptations. Those who have managed to keep the insurrectionary fire alight within their hearts, determined to find something beyond the immiseration of our lives that is offered to us at every turn. These individuals that refuse assimilation are isolated, brutalized, and disappeared into the carceral system. In the hours and days following the reversal of Roe v. Wade, this dynamic played itself out in almost a comical, predictable fashion. In the time leading up to the official reversal, the perceived tensions concerning the issue seemed to threaten to reignite the smoldering embers of the George Floyd uprising that still hangs fresh upon the popular consciousness only a mere 2 years later. With the tensions underlining the insurrections of 2020 still going unresolved, paired with the ongoing, albeit ignored, immiseration of the COVID-19 pandemic, circumstance encouraging the assumption by the many within the constellation of radical milieus that the final revocation of the abortion protections and subsequent criminalization would reignite the insurrectionary fire. This hope, however, did not come to pass. As these words are laid onto paper, there has yet to be a collective firestorm in response to this most recent humiliation, and any suggestion that it might still happen has since faded. The ritual of demonstrations that are endless and fruitless, paraded around by movement managers like some form of miserable circus show, was the unfortunate rule rather than the exception. In limited capacities, a certain resolve to get beyond this miserablest reality that denies us life manifested in the actions of certain individuals. One notable instance includes the considerable vandalism delivered during the march in Atlanta, Georgia, brought some excitement to the day. Likewise, the usual suspects in the Pacific Northwest similarly redecorated the dull artificiality of their urban environments. This, however, is almost mundanely common in much of the Pacific Northwest and indicates the possible limits of such tactics. Outside of this, there were two other more surprising cities that found themselves amongst the outliers. The first of these two cities is Los Angeles, where demonstrators confronted police and at various points were successful in subverting and exceeding the logistical capacities of the police. Los Angeles has a well-known and storied history of riot and rebellion, not the least of which being the '92 Rodney King riots. And against this historical context and its living memory, the notion of the contemporary conflictuality against the police in the city does not feel so unfamiliar. Even in such occurrences are less common now than in previous generations. The other city that found itself amongst the outliers of social rebellion in the wake of Roe's reversal, however, is one that truly feels unfamiliar in such a position: Phoenix, Arizona. The sprawling metropole that suffocates the northern reaches of the Sonoran Desert, a blight premised upon the poisoning and bleeding dry of the fertile river valley that once thrived beneath this monument of colonial terror, is one location of many in the colorful history of rebellion in the southwestern borderlands. This history largely reflects the desert ecology it is staged within, with subversive acts tending towards the dispersed and solitary, while the types of mass action and rioting that are beloved and fetishized by anarchists the world over are far in between. Certainly, there are a number of more isolated and still comparatively small-scale movements of rupture in the Salt River Valley, including but not limited to the confrontation to shut down the NSM demonstration in 2011, an account of which is written in I Saw Fire: Reflections on Riots, Revolt, and the Black Bloc. Trump's 2017 visit to the city, drawing a massive crowd and subsequently handed police response. And lastly, in the moment of rupture during the summer of 2020, several nights of rioting and looting, and the looting of a major mall in one of the wealthiest parts of the Phoenix metro was only stopped by ruthless, indiscriminate police repression in regards to the former, and triggered a Homeland Security investigation in regards to the latter. A brief reflection on the Phoenix participation in the uprisings can be found in Phoenix Rising, Insurgency and Counterinsurgency in the Valley of the Sun. While each of these moments, and particularly that long, beautiful, and tragic weekend in the summer of 2020, where so many long-standing limits were finally surpassed, deserve our recognition and memory alongside a dozen of other instances of expressive action and bravery towards the realization of freedom that went unmentioned here. The contemporary history of mass unrest in Phoenix seems to lack any instance that matches what might be expected from a city of its size, much less what would be needed to meaningfully subvert a city of its size. There's seemingly endless supply of factors and excuses, some more valid and satisfying than others, to explain the impasse in which the city festers. In all likelihood, it's probably that there will never be a succinct and satisfying answer for why Phoenix has such an incredible capacity to disappoint. Yet, between the innumerable failures that Phoenix has delivered upon generations of subversive hearts, there's been moments that glimmered of success, pointing to the horizon obscured from view for so long, proving that our failures are not and never have been inevitable. While we may never fully articulate the truth at the hearts of the sprawling parking lot of a city, the suggestions of something more, and the overcoming sense that our answers, no matter how imperceptible and intangible they feel right now, do indeed exist somewhere, fuels an admittedly annoying sense of obligation to write, speak, and think about this place whenever the social peace is disrupted in any notable manner. This is particularly true when such disruption finds attention beyond our immediate region, and even when, perhaps especially when, that moment of rupture still ultimately brings us back to the all too familiar fallow pastures of defeat. Thus, on the first night that Roe v. Wade was overturned and the tensions on the ground erupted, we were surprised to find in the aftermath that, for once, our miserable hometown was among the outliers of conflict against the state. So we return once again to our solemn duty to think about this place and the attempts to describe it, to seize its character and the ways the miles of concrete and asphalt expanse influence how we relate to one another and the world around us, necessarily determining the possibilities that lay before us. It is our naive hope that this practice can begin to articulate possible ways through the impenetrable fog created by our long-standing impasse, and begin to find the infinite possibilities of life that have been hidden from us.